Global Scan, your one-stop destination for a roundup of all the major global developments of the week. The G20 Extraordinary Summit on Afghanistan, convened virtually by Italy this week, kept the focus on the humanitarian and security concerns emanating from Afghanistan. The IMF revised downwards global growth projections for 2021, even as it projected that India is set to retain the tag of the fastest growing economy in 2022, and the World Health Organization has backed booster dose of COVID-19 vaccine for the immunocompromised people. All that and more in Global Scan. Let's get started with the top stories. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launches the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan for Connectivity. The game-changing launch will lead to rapid infrastructure development across ministries and sectors. PM says the master plan will give an impetus to 21st century India. As the world battles COVID-19, a subject expert committee recommends use of Covaxin for children in the age group of 2 to 18 years in India. US FDA advisors unanimously vote to recommend booster shots of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for Americans over 65 years and other high-risk people. Terror being used as a weapon by irresponsible states and non-state actors, says Defence Minister Rajnath Singh addressing an SCO webinar. Defence Minister says SCO rejects terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Let's begin with news from Asia. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi unveiled the Gati Shakti Master Plan for Infrastructure, which is a 100 lakh crore rupees national master plan for multimodal connectivity that aims to develop infrastructure to reduce logistics costs and boost the economy. On the occasion, the Prime Minister said that the plan aims to design and execute infrastructure schemes of various ministries and state governments with a common vision. Here's more.
With the launch of the Prime Minister Gati Shakti National Master Plan on Wednesday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated the resolve of building an Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is the foundation of New India being laid for the next 25 years. The Prime Minister stressed that the people of India, Indian industry, business, manufacturers of India and Indian farmers are at the center of this Gati Shakti Master Plan. It will give new energy to the present and future generations to build the India of the 21st century.
आज का मंत्र है Will for progress, work for progress, wealth for progress, plan for progress, preference for progress. हमने न सिर्फ परियोजनाओं को तय समय सीमा में पूरा करने का वर्क कल्चर विकसित किया, बल्कि आज समय से पहले प्रोजेक्ट पूरे करने का प्रयास हो रहा है.
Prime Minister Modi said that the gap between macro planning and micro implementation is the root cause of hurdles in the country's path of development. That is the reason why policy planning and their budget allocation do not bear the required results. The Prime Minister also lamented the fact that the subject of infrastructure in our country has not been a priority for most political parties.
हमारे देश में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का विषय ज्यादातर राजनीतिक दलों की प्राथमिकता से दूर रहा है. यह उनके घोषणा पत्र में भी नजर नहीं आता है. अब तो यह स्थिति आ गई है कि कुछ राजनीतिक दल देश के लिए जरूरी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के निर्माण पर आलोचना करने में गर्व करते हैं, जबकि दुनिया में ये स्वीकृत बात है कि सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट के लिए क्वालिटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का निर्माण एक ऐसा रास्ता है जो अनेक आर्थिक गतिविधियों को जन्म देता है, बहुत बड़े पैमाने पर रोजगार का निर्माण करता है.
Prime Minister Modi recalled that when he took over as the Prime Minister in 2014, he reviewed hundreds of stuck projects and put them all on a single platform to realize the collective power of the government in fulfilling schemes.
मैं जब 2014 में यहां दिल्ली एक नई जिम्मेवारी के साथ आया तो भी ऐसे सैकड़ों प्रोजेक्ट थे जो दशकों से लटके हुए थे। लाखों करोड़ रुपए के ऐसे सैकड़ों प्रोजेक्ट्स की मैंने खुद समीक्षा की। सरकार के सारे विभागों, सारे मंत्रालयों को एक प्लेटफॉर्म पर लाकर खड़ा कर दिया, सारी रुकावटों को दूर करने का प्रयास किया। मुझे संतोष है कि अब सबका ध्यान इस ओर गया है कि आपसी तालमेल की कमी की वजह से परियोजनाओं में देरी ना हो।
The Prime Minister cited different examples to elucidate that Gati Shakti Master Plan will not only create immense employment opportunities but also reduce logistic cost, improve supply chains and make local goods globally competitive.
पीएम गति शक्ति अब ये सुनिश्चित करेगी कि 21वीं सदी का भारत इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट में कोऑर्डिनेशन में कमी की वजह से ना पैसे का नुकसान उठाए और ना ही समय गंवाए। पीएम गति शक्ति नेशनल मास्टर प्लान के तहत रोड से लेकर रेलवे तक, एविएशन से लेकर के एग्रीकल्चर तक विभिन्न मंत्रालयों को, विभागों को इससे जोड़ा जा रहा है।
The Prime Minister also inaugurated 4 exhibition complexes of the International Exhibition cum Convention Centre at Pragati Maidan on the occasion. He expressed the hope that with the development of quality infrastructure, India can realize the dream of becoming the business capital of the world, thereby increasing our global competitiveness. With Arun Sharma, TD India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday launched the Indian Space Association. Prime Minister described the reforms in the space sector based on 4 pillars, which are freedom of innovation to the private sector, the government's role as an enabler, preparing the youth for the future and seeing the space sector as a tool for the development of the common man. Here's a detailed report.
In tandem with the national mission of self-reliant and progressive India, the Indian Space Association was formally launched on Monday by Prime Minister Narendra Modi as an industry body. In a virtual event, Prime Minister interacted with representatives and various stakeholders in the Indian space domain, with members comprising Indian Space Research Organisation and others. Prime Minister said, 21st century has ushered in a series of big reforms in all sectors, adding to India's growing global stature. He stressed that there has never been such a decisive government in India as there is today. The major reforms that are happening in the country in the space sector and space tech are example of this.
भारत का सामर्थ्य दुनिया के सभी देश से जरा भी कम नहीं है। इस सामर्थ्य के आगे आने वाली हर रुकावट को दूर करना हमारी सरकार का दायित्व है और इसके लिए सरकार कोई कोर कसर बाकी नहीं छोड़ रही। आज जितनी निर्णायक सरकार भारत में है उतनी पहले कभी नहीं रही। स्पेस सेक्टर और स्पेस टेक को लेकर आज भारत में जो बड़े रिफॉर्म्स हो रहे हैं वो इसी की एक कड़ी है।
Prime Minister remarked that government's approach to space reforms is based on 4 pillars. First, freedom of innovation to the private sector. Second, the role of government as an enabler. Third, preparing the youth for the future. And fourth, to see the space sector as a resource for progress for the common man. Prime Minister remarked that a self-reliant India campaign is not just a vision but also a well-thought, well-planned, integrated economic strategy.
ये विजन है आत्मनिर्भर भारत का। आत्मनिर्भर अभियान सिर्फ एक विजन नहीं है बल्कि एक वेल थॉट, वेल प्लान्ड, इंटीग्रेटेड इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रेटेजी भी है। एक ऐसी स्ट्रेटेजी जो भारत के उद्यमियों, भारत के युवाओं के स्किल की क्षमताओं को बढ़ाकर भारत को ग्लोबल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पावर हाउस बनाए। एक ऐसी स्ट्रेटेजी जो भारत के टेक्नोलॉजिकल एक्सपर्टीज को आधार बनाकर भारत को इनोवेशंस का ग्लोबल सेंटर बनाए। एक ऐसी स्ट्रेटेजी जो ग्लोबल डेवलपमेंट में बड़ी भूमिका निभाए, भारत के ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेज और टैलेंट की प्रतिष्ठा विश्व स्तर पर बढ़ाए।
PM emphasized how the space sector earlier used to be synonymous with ruling dispensation, adding that it was his government that changed this mindset.
आत्मनिर्भर भारत अभियान के तहत भारत ने डिफेंस, कोल और माइनिंग जैसे सेक्टर पहले ही खोल दिए हैं। पब्लिक सेक्टर एंटरप्राइज को लेकर सरकार एक स्पष्ट नीति के साथ आगे बढ़ रही है और जहां सरकार की आवश्यकता नहीं है, ऐसे ज्यादातर सेक्टर्स को प्राइवेट एंटरप्राइज के लिए ओपन कर रही है। अभी एयर इंडिया से जुड़ा जो फैसला लिया गया है, वो हमारी प्रतिबद्धता और गंभीरता को दिखाता है।
Prime Minister pointed out that the space sector means better mapping, imaging and connectivity facilities for people and also last mile delivery, highlighting the importance of cutting edge technology. He said technology has helped in spreading the schemes and programs of the government to the most remote areas.
आज अगर भारत दुनिया की टॉप की डिजिटल इकोनॉमी में से एक है, तो इसके पीछे एक बड़ा कारण यह है कि हमने डेटा की ताकत को गरीब से गरीब को भी सुलभ कराया है। इसलिए आज जब हम कटिंग एज टेक्नोलॉजी के लिए स्पेस को एक्सप्लोर कर रहे हैं, तब हमें उस नागरिक को याद रखना है जो अंतिम पायदान पर खड़ा है।
Prime Minister Modi said, India's space sector is a big medium for progress for 130 crore people, noting that now is the time for India in the 21st century. He said that during the last 7 years, space technology has been converted into a tool of last-mile delivery and leakage-free, transparent governance. He gave examples of the use of geotagging in housing units for the poor, roads and infrastructure projects, development projects being monitored by satellite imaging. Space technology is being used in settlement of Fasal Bima Yojana claims. Navik system is helping fishermen. Disaster management planning is being carried out through this technology. Bureau Report, DD India.
There seems to be no cooling off between India and China with a border standoff at eastern Ladakh, with the latest round of commander-level talks between the two sides remaining inconclusive. The Indian side stood its ground with constructive suggestions for resolving the remaining areas of contention, but the Chinese side was reportedly neither agreeable nor did it provide any forward-looking proposals. But they agreed to maintain stability on the ground. Here's more.
The year-long standoff between India and China over the border dispute in eastern Ladakh does not seem to end. The latest round of talks between the military commanders of the two countries did not yield any significant result. The 13th India-China Corps Commander level meeting was held on October 10, 2021 at the Chushul-Moldo border meeting point. During the meeting, the discussions between the two sides focused on resolution of the remaining issues along the LAC in eastern Ladakh. The statement issued by India after the meeting said, the situation along the LAC had been caused by unilateral attempts of Chinese side to alter the status quo and in violation of the bilateral agreements. It was therefore necessary that the Chinese side take appropriate steps in the remaining areas so as to restore peace and tranquility along the LAC in the western sector. The Indian side emphasized such resolution of the remaining areas would facilitate progress in the bilateral relations. During the meeting, the Indian side therefore made constructive suggestions for resolving the remaining areas, but the Chinese side was not agreeable and also could not provide any forward-looking proposals. The two sides have agreed to maintain communications and also to maintain stability on the ground. The meeting thus did not result in resolution of the remaining areas. In the meeting, both sides agreed to maintain dialogue and maintain stability at the ground level. India said, it is our expectation that the Chinese side will take into account the overall perspective of bilateral relations and will work towards early resolution of the remaining issues while fully abiding by bilateral agreements and protocols. India clearly said that there was an attempt from China to change the LAC, leading to the dispute.
चीन ने वहाँ पर कैंप बनाए अपने, और जिन इलाकों में उन्हें नहीं होना चाहिए और जिन इलाकों से उन्हें वापस जाना चाहिए था, उस इलाके में तो कैंप लगा के बैठे हैं। तो उनका इरादा नहीं था वहाँ से जाने का। अब ये बहानेबाजी है जो भी वो बातचीत कर रहे हैं। जहाँ तक भारत का सवाल है, हमारा स्टैंड बिल्कुल क्लियर है कि भाई अप्रैल 2020 में जो पोजीशन थी, आप उस पोजीशन पे वापस चले जाइए, और जब तक वो नहीं करेंगे तब तक वो भी बैठे हैं और हम भी बैठे हैं, हम भी पीछे हटने वाले नहीं हैं। ये स्टैंड ऑफ इतनी आसानी से नहीं जाएगा।
After several rounds of talks, both the countries withdrew their forces from many areas, except for some areas where the deadlock still persists. Several rounds of talks have been held between India and China at various levels over the matter. The foreign ministers of the two countries also met in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, where it was agreed that both sides should resolve the remaining issues at the earliest, but China's adamant stand has led to no resolution. Bureau Report, DD India.
And now let's take a look at news from the Americas. The US House of Representatives passed a bill on Tuesday to temporarily raise the country's borrowing ceiling with a $480 billion debt limit increase by a vote of 219 to 206, averting the country's first debt default in history. The Treasury Department said that the move will ensure the federal government can continue fully paying its bills into the 3rd of December. Last week, the US Senate had agreed to the emergency debt ceiling extension.
The Democratic-controlled U.S. House of Representatives gave its final approval on Tuesday, October 12, to legislation temporarily raising the government's borrowing limit to $28.9 trillion, pushing off the deadline for debt default only until December. Democrats, who narrowly control the House, maintained party discipline to pass the hard-fought $480 billion debt limit increase by 219 to 206. The vote was along party lines, with every yes from Democrats and every no from Republicans. House passage warded off concerns that the United States, the world's largest economy, would go into default for the first time, but the temporary extension set the stage for continuing fighting between the parties.
The failure to lift the debt limit could result in the loss of up to 6 million jobs, the elimination of $15 trillion in household wealth, and drastic increase in the cost of loans, car loans, mortgages, student loans, credit card bills, and other borrowing.
Republicans insist Democrats should take sole responsibility for raising the debt limit because their party wants to spend trillions of dollars to expand social programs and tackle climate change.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the lady from Minnesota for yielding and for pointing out the truth. You know, I am glad that I decided to wear my boots today because it's getting deep in the swamp up here today, listening to the garbage on the other side of the aisle. Let's put it this way. The Democrats have already pushed through $2 trillion of reckless, wasteful spending at the expense of working-class Americans. And now they're wanting to push through another $4.3 trillion reckless spending bill that will reward their political friends, their wealthy donors, and their allies at the expense of working-class Americans.
Democrats say the increased borrowing authority is needed largely to cover the cost of tax cuts and spending programs during former Republican President Donald Trump's administration, which congressional Republicans supported.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you wonder why people hate Congress. I mean, we have somebody on the Budget Committee who's trying to make us believe that, in fact, that raising the debt limit somehow controls spending. The bottom line is the debt limit is about paying the bills that have already been accumulated, including many of the bills that my friend who just spoke voted to accumulate, including a tax cut bill that benefited the well-off and the well-connected.
Lawmakers also have only until December 3 to pass legislation to fund the government and prevent a shutdown. Pelosi also repeated the Democrats do not want to use a procedural maneuver called reconciliation to raise the ceiling. Reconciliation would let Democrats raise the ceiling with 51 votes rather than 60 required under the Senate's filibuster rule if Republicans will not cooperate. The Senate's vote last week to raise the limit, which had been more routine before the current era of fierce partisanship, turned into a brawl. Republicans tried to link the measure to Biden's goal of passing multi-trillion-dollar legislation to bolster infrastructure and social services while fighting climate change. The months-long fight over the debt limit is closely tied to the November 2022 congressional elections, when Republicans are trying to gain majorities in both the House and the Senate. Democratic lawmakers fear that a Republican boycott of future efforts to raise the debt ceiling will leave them exposed to political attack ads over the next year that accuse Democrats of fiscal malfeasance and disregard for the ballooning debt. But Democrats in turn accuse Republicans of being willing to let the country default on its debts to score political points. During the Trump administration, the debt limit was raised 3 times with the support of Democrats, despite their opposition to Republican initiatives that added to government debt, like 2017 tax cut legislation and Trump priorities like construction of a southwest border wall to keep immigrants out. DD India.
In the United States, a White House commission agreed that the U.S. Congress has the legal power to expand the Supreme Court, but the group was divided on whether lawmakers should actually do it. That's according to a draft discussion materials released on Thursday by the White House, which tasked 30-odd experts with considering an array of possible reforms to the 9-member High Court. The White House Commission, studying potential changes to the U.S. Supreme Court, said expanding the number of justices would pose considerable risks and might further politicize the court. Members of the commission, formed by President Joe Biden, appeared more positive about the benefits of imposing term limits and staggering appointments out over time. But they noted it might not be possible to make such a change without amending the U.S. Constitution. The documents are to be used as a source of debate by members of the commission, who are holding a meeting on Friday and will prepare a report for Biden and turn it over to him by mid-November. After IMF projected that India is set to retain the tag of the fastest growing economy in the world with 8.5% growth rate for the year 2022, Chief Economist of the IMF, Geeta Gopinath, spoke on IMF's global growth projections, saying compared to the July forecast, the global growth projection for 2021 has been revised downwards marginally to 5.9%. She added that the outlook for the low-income developing country group has darkened considerably due to the worsening pandemic dynamics. Gopinath also urged vaccine manufacturers in high-income countries to support the expansion of regional production of COVID-19 vaccines. She also stressed on the need to slow the rise in global temperatures and contain the growing adverse effects of climate change.
Now, compared to our July forecast, global growth projection for this year has been revised down marginally to 5.9% and is unchanged for 2022 at 4.9%. The outlook for low-income developing countries has taken a turn for the worse due to worsening pandemic dynamics. Aggregate output for the advanced economy group is expected to regain its pre-pandemic trend path next year and exceeded by 0.9% in 2024. Now, looking ahead, vaccine manufacturers in high-income countries should support the expansion of regional production of COVID-19 vaccines in developing countries through financing and technology transfers.
A panel of expert advisors to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration unanimously voted on Thursday to recommend booster shots of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for Americans aged 65 and older and those at high risk of severe illness or occupational exposure to the virus. If the FDA signs off on Moderna's booster, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will make specific recommendations on who should get the shots. Meanwhile, CDC advisors are scheduled to meet next week. The FDA's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee met on Thursday to consider the additional dose of the Moderna vaccine. The vote to back Moderna's booster was 19-0, and Moderna is seeking authorization of a booster that contains 50 micrograms of vaccine, half of the strength of its regular dose, but still higher than the Pfizer-BioNTech shot using similar technology at 30 micrograms. U.S. COVID-19 case rates are declining in 39 states and the number of unvaccinated people has declined to 66 million. This was announced by United States President Joe Biden, who praised his plan of introducing vaccine mandates for federal workers and big companies. Biden has credited his path out of the pandemic plan and the administration's urgent push for vaccine requirements. He also praised the continuing work on booster shots as the FDA Advisory Committee reviewed data on Moderna booster doses. Vaccination rates against COVID-19 in the United States have risen by more than 20 percentage points after multiple institutions adopted vaccine requirements in recent months. While case numbers and deaths from the virus are down, the United States still tops the chart of the worst affected nation by the COVID-19. From WHO's backing for booster dose of COVID-19 vaccine for the immunocompromised to how mobility is getting a push after several months of travel restrictions, all that in COVID scam.
The World Health Organization has recommended that immunocompromised people be given an additional dose of COVID-19 vaccine due to their higher risk of breakthrough infections after standard immunization. The Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization said the additional dose should be offered as part of an extended primary series. For the severely or moderately immunocompromised persons, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts recommended that they should be offered an additional dose of all of the WHO's emergency use listing COVID-19 vaccines that have been approved.
For the severely or moderately immunocompromised persons, SAGE recommended that they should be offered an additional dose of all of the WHO EUL COVID-19 vaccines that have been approved. And when I mean all of them, I mean the mRNA ones, the adeno-based ones, and the inactivated ones. We feel, as will be published, that there are a number of people who have a compromise in their immune system, and therefore they need a third dose as an additional priming process so that they're fully protected.
After almost 4 months of stringent lockdown, Australia's Sydney has gradually reopened, bringing cheer to people. Cafes, gyms and restaurants in Sydney welcomed back fully vaccinated customers on Monday. Fully vaccinated Sydneysiders, who make up more than 70% of the city's adults, queued for pubs and shops that opened at midnight specifically for the occasion. COVID rules had banned household visits and travel beyond a 5-kilometer zone, but most restrictions have now been eased for fully vaccinated people. Calling it Freedom Day, New South Wales State Premier Dominic Perrottet said the state needs to learn to live alongside the virus. Australia reopened a slightly more than 2,000 cases on Sunday. That has increased the country's total infection count to over 129,000.
Today is a day so many have been looking forward to. A day when the things we take for granted we'll celebrate. Being with family and friends, getting a haircut, grabbing a meal together, going to the pub and having a beer with your mates. These are things that across New South Wales and particularly in Sydney, people will be able to do again today. And I know all around the country that will be true, particularly in Victoria and here in the ACT.
Thailand has issued new travel guidelines ending mandatory quarantine for visitors from 10 low-risk countries from November 1st. The list includes United Kingdom, the United States, China, Germany and Singapore. Apart from showing proof of being fully vaccinated, the passengers will also be required to show negative COVID-19 RT-PCR test results before they travel and undergo another test once arrived to Thailand. The country's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, describing the move as a small but important step, said that more countries will be added in December and January. For countries which are not considered as low risk, the Prime Minister said that Thailand also welcomes their citizens, but they will be subject to quarantine and have to comply with some restrictions which are yet to be announced. The United States will lift restrictions at its land borders with Canada and Mexico for fully vaccinated foreign nationals in early November, ending historic curbs on non-essential travelers in place since March 2020 to address the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in a statement said the administration next month will begin allowing travelers from Mexico and Canada who are fully vaccinated for COVID-19 to enter the United States for non-essential purposes, including to visit friends and family or for tourism via land and ferry border crossings. Indonesia's top holiday destination Bali has reopened to foreign tourists after 18 months of COVID-19 pandemic hiatus. However, the international airport in the island was empty since no flights were scheduled to land. Tourists from only 19 countries are now permitted to visit Bali. These include India, Japan, South Korea, China and New Zealand. The list also includes several countries from Western Europe and the Arabian Gulf. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
The G20 Extraordinary Summit on Afghanistan was convened by Italy, the current chair of the G20. At the virtual summit, member states pledged to avert an economic catastrophe in Afghanistan. The summit came as the UN urged world leaders to put billions of dollars into the Afghan economy. At the summit, the US stressed that aid should be provided through independent international organizations and not directly to the ruling Taliban. India, on its part, flagged the threat of terrorism, calling for a unified response against it.
The group of 20 major economies is determined to tackle the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, even if it means having to coordinate efforts with the Taliban, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi said on Tuesday after hosting an emergency summit. Since the Taliban took over Afghanistan on 15th of August, the country, already struggling with drought and severe poverty following decades of war, has seen its economy all but collapse, raising the spectre of an exodus of refugees. Draghi said at the end of a video conference that there has been basically a convergence of views on the need to address the humanitarian emergency.
We have to answer the humanitarian crisis. That's the very first thing. If that requires, and it will require contacts with the Taliban. There's no alternative to having contacts with them. They are essential for this answer, for this response to be effective. That doesn't imply a recognition. A recognition will have to acknowledge that the Taliban will be judged for what their deeds are, not their words. Recognition means, at least by most of the G20 countries, means that progress has been made exactly along the words and the commitments the Taliban government took a few days ago.
US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and many European leaders took part, but Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin did not dial in, suggesting differing international positions on the emergency. Draghi said the absence of the latter two leaders did not undercut the importance of the meeting organized by Italy, the current G20 chair. Addressing the summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed upon preventing the Afghan territory from becoming a source of radicalization and terrorism. The Prime Minister called for a unified international response based on UNSC Resolution 2593 to improve the situation in Afghanistan. The UN Security Council Resolution 2593, issued on 30th of August under India's month-long presidency, emphasizes that Afghanistan must not allow its soil to be used for terrorism-linked activities. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also called for urgent and unhindered humanitarian assistance to Afghan citizens. There was unanimous agreement among the participants about the need to elevate the crisis in Afghanistan, where banks are running out of money, civil servants have not been paid, and food prices have soared, leaving millions at risk of severe hunger. Much of the aid effort will be channeled through the United Nations, but there will also be direct country-to-country assistance, despite a refusal by most states to officially recognize the hardline Taliban government. Italy said it is indeed very hard to see how nations can help people in Afghanistan without involving the Taliban, but that would not mean recognizing them. He said the Taliban would be judged by their deeds, not their words, and the world was especially concerned about the plight of women in the impoverished nation. The White House said leaders had discussed the critical need to maintain a laser focus on ensuring counter-terrorism efforts, including against threats from ISIS-K. In a joint statement after the meeting, the G20 leaders called on the Taliban to tackle militant groups operating out of the country. They said future humanitarian programs should focus on women and girls, and that safe passage should be given to those Afghans who wish to leave the country. Tuesday's meeting comes less than 3 weeks before the formal G20 leaders summit in Rome on 30th and 31st of October, which is due to focus on climate change, global economic recovery, tackling malnutrition and COVID-19 pandemic. DD India.
And now all the global sporting action in Sports Camp. Ronaldo scored a hat-trick. Denmark and Germany booked their berths in the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. Hungary held England to a 1-1 draw in a game marred by crowd trouble. All that and more in the FIFA World Cup qualifier roundup.
Germany became the first team to join host Qatar at the 2022 World Cup with a thumping victory in North Macedonia. Germany qualified for the 2022 World Cup after crushing North Macedonia 4-0 to secure the top spot in their qualifying Group J with 2 games to spare. 2 second-half goals from Timo Werner and 1 each from Kai Havertz and Jamal Musiala lifted Germany to 21 points, with Romania in second place on 13 and 2 games remaining. The Germans, who were eliminated in the first round of the 2018 World Cup and the last 16 at this year's Euros, had an early chance with Thomas Müller header. Denmark became the second European nation to reach the 2022 World Cup after a 1-0 home win over Austria that left them top of qualifying Group F with an unassailable 7 points lead over second-place Scotland. The Danes secured their own berth with 2 games to spare as a 53rd minute goal from Joachim Miley helped them to an 8th successive qualifying victory. Denmark have scored 27 goals and conceded none so far in World Cup qualifying, with their run to the finals underpinned by some impressive free-flowing football. For their flair and attacking potential, the Danes did look jittery for long spells against a well-organised Austria side who packed their midfield to cut off the supply routes. England took another somewhat faltering step towards 2022 World Cup qualification when they drew 1-1 with Hungary at Wembley, as they are now 3 points clear at the top of Group I with 2 matches remaining. The game was marred by fighting in the stands between Hungary fans and Baton-Wielding police just after kick-off, with riot police entering the fray as visiting supporters forced stewards and police backed down a tunnel. Visitors went ahead with Roland Salai penalty after 24 minutes after England fullback Luke Shaw caught a stooping Lochi Nigo in the head as he attempted a clearance. England equalised in the 37th minute when a Phil Foden free kick was flicked on by Tyrone Mings and the ball was turned in by John Stones from close range. A Cristiano Ronaldo hat-trick helped Portugal stroll to a 5-0 victory over Luxembourg in World Cup qualifying Group A. The victory ensures Portugal remain a point behind group leader Serbia and boast a game in hand as well as superior goal difference with 2 rounds of matches remaining. The treble, which meant Ronaldo became the first man to net 10 international hat-tricks, takes his tally to 115 international goals from 182 caps as he continues to extend his lead as the top men's international goal scorer of all time. Portugal had the game all but won within the opening 18 minutes as they raced to a 3-goal lead. Ronaldo struck twice from the penalty spot in the 8th and 13th minute. Sports Desk, DD India.
And now stories that make news but not headlines in Beyond Headlines.
A special mass for animals was held in Lima at the St. Francis Monastery. The event, known as the Blessing of the Animals Mass, honors St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals. Although all animals were welcome to receive a blessing, the ceremony mainly drew dogs and their owners. Last year, the annual tradition was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Animal lovers in Mexico had their share of a visual treat at Guadalajara Zoo, where 4 rare Bengal tiger cubs enthralled them as the carnivores playfully explored their enclosure. The 3-month-old tigers became celebrities in no time at the zoo ever since their public debut in late September. The cubs have been sharing their enclosure with their mother since their birth. According to the World Wildlife Fund, Bengal tigers are native to Asia, with the majority of the 2,200 wild animals left found in India. Conservation efforts by India have helped stabilize the species. Children in Singapore were seen playing Red Light, Green Light, a game featured on Netflix's global hit Squid Game. The video, shot in a housing estate in North Singapore, shows children running and stopping as they heard another child's commands. The playground game, where players stop and go at a tagger's command, is one of the 6 kids' games with fatal consequences depicted in the gory thriller named after a South Korean variation of tag played in the 1970s and 80s using a board drawn in the dirt. A Frida Kahlo self-portrait currently on display in Hong Kong could become the most expensive Latin American artwork ever sold at public auction internationally when it goes under the hammer on November the 16th. Kahlo's Diego Vayo will be auctioned off this autumn as a star lot at the Sotheby's Modern Evening Sale in New York, where the sales price is estimated to be at $30 million or even higher. Completed in 1949, the artwork is a powerful example of Kahlo's iconic self-portraits. The operator of Narita Airport near Tokyo has started a service that lets couples pose for wedding pictures in front of planes and facilities. It is offering the photo shoots while demand for overseas flights is low. Narita International Airport Corporation started the unique service with nearby hotels after coronavirus state of emergency was lifted. One couple in their 20s had their pictures taken in front of a passenger jet on a parking apron on Monday. Vivid green strands of light danced across the night sky over the Canadian province of Alberta. The Aurora Borealis, also known as the Northern Lights, were visible due to the impact of a coronal mass ejection. According to NASA, CMEs are formed from clouds of solar plasma combined with embedded magnetic fields, which are released into space following a solar eruption. The Aurora Borealis also lit up the night skies of the United States with a vivid green hue. Videos shared on social media showed the shimmering lights over Grand Forks in North Dakota. A statue of Christopher Columbus in central London has been doused with red paint. The bronze statue of the 15th century Italian explorer sits on the edge of Belgrave Square, close to Buckingham Palace. It was seen covered in red paint with a red cross marked over the inscription commemorating the life of the Italian explorer's life between 1446 and 1506. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Here's all that made history this week in the yesteryears.
On October 11 in 1899, the Second Boer War, also known as the Boer War, the Anglo-Boer War or the South African War, was fought between the British Empire and 2 independent Boer states, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, over the empire's influence in South Africa. The trigger of the war was the discovery of diamonds and gold in the Boer states. On October 11 in 2004, the European Union ended 11 years of sanctions against Libya and eased its arms embargo as a reward for Tripoli, giving up plans to develop weapons of mass destruction. The move, which diplomats said was in accordance with a UN decision last year, reflected a significant warming of relations between Libya and the European Union in recent months. On October 11 in 2007, British novelist Doris Lessing won the Nobel Prize for Literature for a body of work that looked unflinchingly at society's ills and inspired a generation of feminist writers. On 12th of October 1915, British nurse Edith Cavell was shot for helping Allied soldiers escape from German-occupied Brussels during the World War I. On 12th of October in the year 1918, on this day, a massive forest fire raged through Minnesota, killing 453 people. The fire is known as the Cloquet Moose Lake Fire because that is where the damage was worst. On 12th of October in the year 1997, singer John Denver died when his light plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean. He was 53. On October 13, 2002, British marathon runner Paula Radcliffe shattered the record-winning 25th Chicago Marathon. On October 14, 1998, Nigeria's exiled Nobel Literature laureate Wole Soyinka returned home. Nearly 4 years after fleeing the military dictatorship he vigorously opposed. On October 15, 1993, Nelson Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to end apartheid and lay the foundations for a democratic South Africa. On October 15, 2013, hundreds died as a 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck islands popular with tourists in the Philippines. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And now some more global news in Fast Forward.
At least 4 killed and 6 people wounded in a car bomb explosion in the Syrian city of Afrin. A video footage showed smoke billowing from a fire burning in the street while emergency service workers sprayed water onto burning vehicles. Turkey has blamed previous bomb attacks in Afrin on the Syrian Kurdish YPG group, which held the Afrin area until Turkish forces seized the region in a cross-border military operation in 2019. Turkey regards the YPG as a terrorist group tied to the PKK inside its own borders and has staged incursions into Syria in support of Syrian rebels to push it from the Turkish frontier, while the YPG views Turkey as an invader and occupying force. In California, at least 2 people were killed after a small aircraft crashed blocks from a high school campus near San Diego. 2 others who were injured in the incident were rushed to a nearby hospital. As many as 2 homes appear to have been destroyed by an ensuing fire. The city of Santee, California, where the crash occurred. The plane, a C-340 twin-engine Cessna, headed to Yuma, Arizona from Montgomery Field in San Diego. It had issues and was trying to land at Gillespie Field when it crashed. It was not immediately clear how many people were on board the plane. The remaining cooling towers of a former power station in northern England were blown up in a controlled implosion on October 10th. Video showed the 4 towers at Eggborough Power Station in Yorkshire crashing down in a cloud of smoke. It took more than 9 months of planning to demolish the 300 feet high structures, DSM Demolition Group said. The remaining towers removal from the skyline followed the demolition of 4 others on August 1st. The towers have been a landmark in Yorkshire for 50 years. Demonstrators gathered in different cities of Bolivia on Tuesday to celebrate the indigenous Whiphala flag and to show support for Bolivian President Luis Arce. During the Great Whiphalazo, sympathizers of the MAS ruling party arrived in La Paz, where Arce gave a speech at the San Francisco Square. On Monday, protesters marched against a legislation that would give the Bolivian government power to investigate private assets of citizens. Critics of Arce are skeptical of legislation that could see authorities be given the power to investigate the private assets of citizens without an order from the court. A former US Navy nuclear engineer and his wife faced their first court hearing on charges they attempted to sell secrets about nuclear submarines to a foreign power in exchange for cryptocurrency. They appeared before the court for a normal reading of the criminal charges against them. They have not yet been asked to enter a plea to the charges. Jonathan Toybbe and his wife Diana were arrested on Saturday in Jefferson County, West Virginia, following a year-long sting operation by undercover FBI agents. Toybbe, a nuclear engineer with top-secret security clearance, is accused of sending Navy documents to an unnamed foreign entity in 2020, along with instructions for how to obtain additional information. In Norway, at least 5 people have been killed and 2 more injured after a man used a bow and arrow to attack them. The incident happened in the town of Kongsberg, southwest of the capital Oslo on Wednesday evening. The attacker had been apprehended and a large-scale investigation has been launched. Kongsberg police chief said police would investigate whether the attack amounted to an act of terror. Following the attacks, the police directorate said it had immediately ordered officers nationwide to carry firearms. Norwegian police are normally unarmed, but officers have access to guns and rifles when needed.
We leave you now with images that stayed in news this week. I'll take your leave. Namaskar.
और इधर मेघनाथ में